the News Channel 5 network. This is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Layman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Wednesday night on News Channel 5 Plus. Plenty of topics to get to on the sports front today. Big news in the National Hockey League right here in Nashville. The Predators making a trade, sending longtime defenseman Kevin Klein to the New York Rangers in exchange for another defenseman in Michael Del Zotto. General Manager David Poile said, although it is swapping a pair of defensemen, they're two very different players. Klein has been a very solid defensive-minded defenseman for the Predators over the last several years. Dating back to being drafted in 2003, really came up in the system. The third guy in that draft class behind Shea Weber and Ryan Suter. And now Weber is the only one left of that class that has really been so instrumental in what the Preds have done in recent years. But Klein leaves Nashville. That's sad for a lot of fans, but as David Poile explained it, it was a move that was necessary as they move forward in that defense, in the back line of defense for the Predators. With so many young guys, this is another young guy, but he's a guy that fits what they want to do. They want to get a little bit more offensive-minded, and Del Zotto's a guy who scored 42 points a couple of years ago for the Rangers. He's got 26 career goals and a little more than 4 seasons at the NHL level from defense. He's a guy that can really add to your power play. Also, a guy with great puck handling capabilities, a very smooth skater as well. And maybe the most important factor here is he's a left-handed shot. And as you look at the Predators right now, from Shea Weber to Seth Jones, who they drafted last summer, and Ryan Ellis, who's really come on and played well for this team this year, you've got 3 right-handed shots on this defensive line. Klein was another guy in there. Del Zotto, on the other hand, is a left-handed shot. And so it figures he's going to fit in somewhere either opposite Jones or opposite Ellis for the Predators' defense, and that just makes more sense as they move forward. So while Kevin Klein has been a great player for the Predators, a lot of fans love him here in Nashville, this was a move they felt they had to make. As Poile said today, it's a move they've been talking about for a while and really felt was inevitable. So time to go out there and make the move today. We can talk about that coming up on the program. 737-7767 is the number if you'd like to chime in. We can also talk about football news. The Titans are making a few more moves today. Ken Wisenhunt wants to pile up the points next season on offense. Today, he piled up offensive assistant coaches, going out and hiring John McNulty of the Bucs, their quarterbacks coach, to the same position here in Tennessee. The Titans certainly hope he can have an impact on the quarterback position, much like he did last season for the Bucs. Mike Glennon turned out to have the highest quarterback rating of any rookie quarterback in the NFL last year, and he was not the most heralded guy out of that quarterback rookie class. Wasn't expected to even start the season with Josh Freeman in Tampa Bay, but he came on strong down the stretch. Ken Wisenhunt believes John McNulty had a big part in that. He's also a guy that Wisenhunt has worked with before, going back to their days in Arizona. So McNulty now has the opportunity to come here to Tennessee and try to help Wisenhunt put together a winner on the field offensively. Kevin Patullo's been hired as the wide receivers coach. He's a guy that's got NFL coaching experience both with the Chiefs and the Bills. He now comes in to help out at that position alongside Sean Jefferson. And Mike Mularkey, former Jaguars head coach. We knew this move was coming. The question is just, where does he fit in on the staff? He will be the tight ends coach for the Titans coming up here. And Mularkey's been down at the Senior Bowl all week, sort of scouting out guys and making the rounds with players already getting to work for Ken Wisenhunt. But his hiring officially announced today. And just a few minutes ago, we found out that former Titans coach Mike Munchak will be back on the sideline next year as a member of the hated Pittsburgh Steelers. Munchak heading to Pittsburgh to be the offensive line coach, which apparently means he's out of the running for the final head coaching vacancy in the NFL in Cleveland. The Browns reportedly interviewed former Bucs head coach Greg Schiano today. Still hope to talk to the coordinators in Seattle, Darrell Bevell on offense, Dan Quinn on defense, maybe some other guys as well in the mix, but it appears Mike Munchak no longer a candidate for the Browns head coaching job, which means he has taken the Steelers offensive line coach position, and it means he's probably going to be facing the Titans very soon. Those two teams often match up in the AFC, and so expect several meetings with a Mike Munchak coach team coming up in the near future. Also tonight, you've got a couple of basketball games in the SEC, important ones at that. Tennessee leading Arkansas at home 39-37 at the half. Very sloppy game so far. And this is a game that the Vols must win for their NCAA tournament hopes. They just cannot afford to lose any more games at home. Already lost an SEC game to Texas A&M. Got beat up pretty bad by NC State at Tommy Bowl earlier this season. So this is a game, especially against an Arkansas team that has lost 43 of its last 50 road games, that the Vols just simply have to win. They cling to a 2-point lead at the break, and just about to tip off, maybe just underway over at Memorial Gym. Vanderbilt taking on Ole Miss. And this is a game a lot of the Commodores, from talking to them earlier this week, have had circled on the schedule this year. Marshall Henderson, of course, the brash and brazen leading scorer of the Rebels, ranks third in the SEC this year, just over 19 points a game. Led the SEC in scoring last year. He will shoot it from anywhere, and he will not stop talking at any point throughout the game. Commodores had enough of him last year. Henderson scored 49 points in 2 Rebels victories over Vandy here in Nashville, one at Memorial Gym, in which Henderson hit a half-court buzzer beater at the end of regulation to force overtime, and then took the game over in the extra session, and then won in the SEC tournament at Bridgestone Arena that ended Vanderbilt's really improbable run into the SEC tournament semifinals. Of course, ended their season as well. The Rebels going on to win the SEC tournament title. And right after that game, there were several Commodore players who were really upset with just how much Marshall Henderson talked and his actions on the floor in the waning minutes of that game. And they've been ready for this year. Their goal definitely to shut him down and shut him up. So we'll find out if they are able to do that as the proceedings move along over at Memorial Gym tonight. Our phone lines are open. 737-7767 is the number. We can talk about any of those topics I just threw out on the table. What do you make of all the coaching moves that you have seen? What do you make about what's going on with the Predators? Happy to take your calls on any of that stuff. And also, I want to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl matchup and what we saw over the weekend. We really didn't get a chance to talk about that on Monday. I think this is a fascinating matchup coming up in about 10 days now in East Rutherford. You've got the number one offense in the NFL in Peyton Manning, who is having the best statistical season of any quarterback in the history of the National Football League, against the league's top defense in Seattle. Those two go head-to-head. I think that's going to be a really intriguing matchup out there in New York, New Jersey, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how the weather impacts what's going on next week as well. The forecast right now calls for snow on Saturday night and temperatures in the upper teens, perhaps low 20s for the Super Bowl. So that will by far be the worst conditions we've ever seen in 48 Super Bowls. And you've got a team that really wants to throw the ball in the 49 or in the Broncos in that game, and Peyton Manning. So you've got to see how that will have an effect on the game as well. The league even talking today about their contingency plans. We had heard before that if you have really inclement weather on Sunday, lots of snow, that makes it unable to play the game and really put off a Super Bowl like they would expect, that they could potentially move the game to Monday. That's one thing. But today we heard that the NFL also has contingency plans in place based off the forecast in which they could move the game up on Sunday, move the game, in fact, to Saturday, and possibly even Friday night. And to me, I just don't know how that is even possible. How do you move up the Super Bowl? It's one thing if it gets postponed or something, everybody shows up to the stadium and can't play it. That's obvious. You got to move it back. But how do you move it up? I mean, First off, just from a competitive standpoint, both the Broncos and Seahawks are sitting there in Seattle and Denver right now, and they're planning out the next 2 weeks. They're trying to get guys healthy this week. They're trying to get in work this week. You get to New York next week, and all of a sudden you have all these media responsibilities every day. You have the practice plan all scheduled out. What do you do if all of a sudden the NFL comes to you and says, all right, guys, we're now going to play the game 48 hours earlier. It's going to be Friday night. See you then. How do you adjust your schedule then? What kind of a competitive disadvantage is that to both teams to do that? I mean, we've never seen that before with any game, even a preseason game. Now we're going to do that to the Super Bowl? That just seems crazy to me. And it comes back to another part of this. I've never been a fan of the Super Bowl being played outdoors in elements that could potentially cause you to move it up or move it back by days. I'm fine with Super Bowls being a football game and being a game of the elements. Football is a game of the elements. But to a degree, you have to understand what's best for the product. The NFL is a global, multi-billion-dollar industry. And the Super Bowl is its premier event. Frankly, it's the premier event in the world. Not just of sports, but of everything, every year. The idea that you might have to drastically shift it from day to day based off the weather means you probably should have put it someplace else. Or put it inside. I understand that New York is a huge stage. It's a great thing. It's what Roger Goodell wanted to do. The NFL's there, rewards the Giants and the Jets for putting in a new stadium. I get all that. But at the end of the day, it is still the most important football game of this season. Most important game for the Seahawks and Broncos in a long, long time. This is for a world championship, and they're talking about possibly moving it up by 48 hours. Or moving it back, depending on what the weather does. We don't know. How is that possible? Not to mention you have all the parties and the hoopla that goes on in New York as well. You've got all the fans that have to go there. You're probably buying tickets to fly in some cases on Friday or Saturday. Now you're going to tell them that, oh, wait, we might actually play the game on Friday night? How does that work? Got to imagine you're going to have a lot of people ticked off about that. This reminds me of a couple years ago, 3 years ago to be exact, when the Super Bowl was in Dallas. Now, Dallas got really screwed by some unfortunate weather events that hardly ever happen. They got a once in 20, 25-year ice storm during the middle of the week and had temperatures in the single digits at points, which just doesn't really ever happen in Dallas. But it drastically changed the tone of that week. You could not get around the Metroplex for the first 3, 4, 5 days of that week. Media responsibilities were impossible when you were driving from New York to Irving to Fort Worth, then down to Arlington to the stadium. You just couldn't get around because they didn't know what to do with the ice or the cold temperatures or anything like that. Same thing for a fan perspective. When people came in, the lines at parties were much smaller than you normally see. People couldn't get to the events that they paid high dollars to go to. Now you're talking about possibly the same situation in New York City. Even in perfect conditions, if they got lucky and it was 50 degrees, you still have to deal with all the movement of having a Super Bowl in New York City and then in New Jersey. Because the Super Bowl is outside in New Jersey, Media Day is at the Prudential Center, the home of the New Jersey Devils, the hockey team. That's never happened before. So you've got two different sites, the stadium and a hockey arena. That's a big part of what the media has to do during the course of the week. You have two different practice facilities somewhere else in northern New Jersey. But then you have all the team hotels and functions, and you have all the media functions, plus all the fan experiences and all the parties in New York City. If you know anything about that area, you know it's hard to get from those places to and from those places on a good day. Now you throw in the fact that it could snow and freezing temperatures and ice and all that stuff that comes with it. It is going to be a mess. And frankly, it probably serves Roger Goodell right for having this idea in the first place, if it is a mess, to see if they can pull it off, what the reaction from the NFL community and fans are, and if they ever do it again. I just don't see how that works. Anyway, we got to take a first break. I am absolutely blowing through it right now. So we'll take that break. We'll come back to get to your phone call. 737-7767 is the number. We want to hear from you. This is SportsLine on News Channel 5+.